Let's talk tonight about the Church of God Mountain Assembly's polity and procedures. And by polity, we're just talking about government, the way in which our organization operates. We're going to spend this first session then dealing with our constitutional declaration and bylaws. And so let's begin by talking about the constitutional declaration. And I'm going to just walk you through the preamble to the bylaws, and then we're going to digest the bylaws. The first thing that you'll find when you dig into the Church of God Mountain Assembly's Constitutional Declaration bylaws is the statement of purpose. And I want to mention it very briefly because we've not talked about it at any point up to this point. And so I want to talk about it. When the standard resolutions of the Church of God Mountain Assembly were reconstructed in 2000 to give us our constitutional declaration of bylaws, I talked a little bit about that a few weeks ago, about how the resolution committee took the existing resolutions and restructured them in a format that is more similar to our Constitution, and we'll dig into that more in the next slide, but or the next couple of slides. But in addition to that, they also saw the need to establish at the very forefront a statement of purpose. And so the statement of purpose of the Church of God Mountain Assembly was created in 2000. And so it reads thus: the Church of God Mountain Assembly exists to promote through the establishment of local churches the expression of the worship of God, the exalting of the Lord Jesus Christ, experiencing the dynamics and fullness of the Holy Spirit, equipping and edification of believers for the propagation of the gospel by acknowledging and developing individual God-given gifts, calling, and talents. And so this is the purpose, this is the reason that the Church of God Mountain Assembly exists. And the focus again is on local churches. We're promoting through the establishment of local churches these various aspects of the Christian life. It's about worship, it's about discipleship, it's about evangelism, it's about service in ministry, and so you see, and about fellowship, and so you see these aspects spelled out in our purpose statement. The preamble also continues by including the church covenant that we talked about in length a couple of sessions ago. The covenant, of course, written by John Newton Brown in 1853, first published in a Baptist church manual. It was adopted by the Church of God Mountain Assembly at a ministers' meeting on November the 30th, 1917 at Pleasant View, Kentucky. I also went back and looked. I mentioned there's a couple of lines that are missing from the covenant. Those lines were included in the original 1917 covenant. They disappeared in 1922. I'm sure that it was a typographical error. I'm sure it was just something that in the process. So it's the lines that exist in between exemplary and continue with in our deportment. And so you'll have to refer back to your notes from the previous meeting. And then I also mentioned that in 1944, the last paragraph of the covenant about when we move from this place to another, we'll find another church to carry out the spirit of this covenant. That line was taken out in 1944, and that line may have been taken out on purpose. Again, the reason for which I don't have an answer to. But our church covenant appears in the preamble as well as the Articles of Faith. We've talked about how the Church of God Mountain Assembly adopted an Articles of Faith at the very first assembly in 1907, and then again in 1917 at the ministers' meeting that I mentioned above. where the covenant was adopted. These articles of faith had been modified and transformed by the 1970s and 80s, were finally included in, they were never included on an annual basis in the minute book until the assembly was, or until the bylaws were restructured in 2000 and have become a permanent fixture in the bylaws ever since then. And then the last part of the preamble includes the teachings of the Church of God Mountain Assembly, which you'll remember first appeared in 1920. Some have been amended, others some have remained exactly the same since 1920. Some have been transformed. There have been some that have been deleted, and some have been added. There have been some that have just been added to the teachings as social challenges presented the need. So let's talk about the bylaws themselves, and we'll start by looking at the branches of church polity, and look at the first three articles. Article 1 deals with the General Council. Again, I mentioned that again. This our constitutional declaration of bylaws mirror the United States Constitution. So Article 1 of the United States Constitution deals with the legislative branch, and in the same way, the Article 1 of our bylaws deals with the lawmaking body of the Assembly, which is the General Council. And so we'll talk about the delegation. The General Council is composed of licensed and ordained ministers and appointed delegates. Every church is entitled to 2 delegates from the local church, appointed by the local church to represent them in the General Council, along with every licensed and ordained minister are also included in that council, and they are the lawmaking body of the assembly. They elect the assembly's officers. All licensed and ordained ministers are required to send their delegate application, their application to be a part of the General Council. They're required to send that to their district overseer by July 10th for his approval. And so the district overseer would sign the application approving of basically making sure that he's qualified, that he's a supporter of his local church and a supporter of the assembly program, and then the local churches are allowed 2 delegates. And each delegate must be, to be an appointed delegate from the church, the delegate must be a tither and a supporter of the assembly program and must have attained the age of 18 years in order to be a qualified delegate. The General Council, or the delegation, convenes on the Tuesday before the first Wednesday in August. That wording is probably going to be changed by a resolution this coming year, I imagine, as the school year has gotten earlier and earlier. We've already changed the timing of when the assembly meets twice in the last 10 or 15 years, and it looks like that we're headed for another change as well, especially with the impending 2019 General Assembly being pushed back later into August because of when the first Tuesday falls. It looks like we're probably going to have to need to at least reconsider when that meets. And so again, when the assembly meets is set by our bylaws, and then also every decision made by the council ruled by majority vote according to our bylaws. We also observe Church of God Mountain Assembly General Council business sessions shall be governed by accepted rules of parliamentary procedure as outlined in Robert's Rules of Order, Modern Edition, in keeping with the spirit of Christian love and fellowship. And so, again, there is spelled out in our bylaws that when it comes to procedure, parliamentary procedure in our business, that we use Robert's Rules of Order, the Modern Edition. There are also some, in addition to what's spelled out in Robert's Rules of Order, we also have some rules that are not covered by Robert's Rules of Order that govern our business. Among them, the conference should be opened and closed by prayer. That's not in Robert's, that's in our bylaws. You have to open and close the meeting with prayer. After the meeting has been called to order, anyone wishing to speak should rise and address the moderator with brotherly respect. The word brother should be the only title of address legal in a motion. The speaker shall strictly adhere to the subject, discuss it fairly, in no wise make remarks about the imperfections in the person who spoke before him. No member shall speak more than 2 times on any one subject without obtaining permission from the House. No member has the right to rise up and call for a vote on the House or any question without the moderator's consent. If the speaker digresses from the subject or otherwise violates the rules of procedure, he should be called to order by the moderator. No member shall leave the room during the session without the consent of the moderator. The moderator shall be entitled to the same privilege of speech as any other member, providing the chair be filled. So if the moderator, the general overseer, chooses to speak on a subject, he should yield the chair to the assistant or someone else and be entitled to the same privilege of speech. But he shall have no vote unless a tie. Again, this differentiates from Robert's Rules of Order in that Roberts says that the moderator is permitted to vote in a secret ballot, for example. He's permitted to vote on his own. But our bylaws specify he cannot vote on any subject unless it's in order to break a tie. Moderator shall not give his decision on any subject unless he's called upon by the body to do so. So these are just some of the provisions that are in our bylaws that deal with rules and order. And then also on the subject of the agenda, the order of business is proposed by the executive board through an agenda presented and adopted at the beginning of each general council session. And so our executive board will sit down, prepare an agenda, and then it's presented at the beginning of business and adopted by the general council. And of course, they can modify it or what have you before it's formally adopted. And then amendment procedure. The amendments to the standard resolutions and doctrinal statements of the Church of God Mountain Assembly can be made at any general council meeting, as long as those proposals have been received by the resolution committee with a postmark of July 1st or prior. And again, this was written at a time before electronic submissions, and so the idea is that it's time stamped if it's sent electronically by July 1st or postmarked by July 1st if it's sent through standard mail. But the idea is that the amendments have to be received by the resolution committee prior to July 1st. We'll talk more about what the resolution committee does with them in just a few moments. Any amendment to an existing bylaw requires a 2/3 majority vote. Any new addition requires a simple majority. And so if you want to add something to the bylaws that does not change, that does not significantly change anything that's already in the existing bylaws, then it requires a brand new resolution, for example, brand new statement in our bylaw, brand new bylaw requires a simple majority, but anything that amends the current bylaws or the current teachings require a 2/3 majority vote. We've spelled out again with our rules of procedure and election procedure. That election procedure includes the General Secretary and Treasurer reading the qualifications that are necessary before for each position before the nominations are opened, so that the Secretary and Treasurer would read to the delegation what's required from each position before we have a vote. And then also as far as the election procedure itself, the general officials and elders of the Church of God Mountain Assembly shall be elected by the General Council by majority vote. And so all elected officials and elders are elected by majority. If on the first ballot no nominee receives a majority on the first ballot. Then there's a second ballot held, a runoff, that would be between the two that got the most votes. This process is to ensure that every official is elected by majority. So that, for example, if you've got 25 people running for general overseer, we don't take the guy that gets 10 votes and make him the overseer if they're spread, you know. And so the others would be eliminated, and on the second ballot, the one with the majority would be elected. This is for the general officials and for the elders. When we're electing committees and boards, members of the finance committee, the program committee, the resolution committee, the trustee board, the campground, when we're electing committees, those men are elected by a plurality vote, or whoever gets the most votes. Okay? So that so the man doesn't have to have a majority of the members. He just has to, if there's 3 men on the committee, he just has to be in the top 3. If there's 5, he just has to be in the top 5. And so we generally just take one ballot for the committees and boards with 5 attached ballots or 3 attached ballots, depending on how many we're voting on. And the ones receiving the highest number are elected to that board. If for example, 3 men serve on the finance committee, so you take 3 ballots that are attached and write 3 different names. So if there's 5 or 6, or how many's nominated, you write 3 names and you keep them attached, you know, so that you are voting for 3 different people. Now you don't have to vote for more than one, but you do have to have 3 ballots that are attached. So you could write one man's name. Now you can't write one man's name down 3 times. But you can write one man's name down and 2 blanks if you only want to vote for one, or whatever the case is. But you have to have 3 ballots that are attached. Any ballots that are not attached are illegal and do not count. Any ballot that has the same person's name more than one time is illegal, and none of those count. And so it's 3 or it's 5, depending on the makeup, how many are on the committee. There is a provision in our bylaws that when we need a committee of 5 and only 5 are nominated, or we need a committee of 3 and only 3 are nominated, in those circumstances, we can suspend the rules and elect by acclamation. So when there's a committee that's being voted on and you need 3 and you got 3 nominated, you can suspend the rules and elect them by acclamation and forego the formality of a secret ballot vote. That provision is on committees only, not on the general officials or on the elders. And then talk about election procedure, and then minutes. The minutes of the General Council shall bear the standard name of the assembly, the Church of God Mountain Assembly Incorporated, and all churches' addresses and phone numbers are inserted in the annual minute book. And so, and of course, the General Secretary and Treasurer generally records the minutes and then publishes them, sends them to the delegates shortly after the General Assembly, and then they're published in the annual minute book. Article 2 of the Constitutional Declaration bylaws deals with the executive branch. It deals with our general officials. And so let's talk about them. First of all, the Executive Board. The Executive Board of the Church of God Mountain Assembly is a 4-member board. It's made up of the General Overseer, the General Secretary and Treasurer, and their assistants. So the General Overseer and his assistant, General Secretary and Treasurer, and his assistant. In order to be elected to the Executive Board, or to be nominated for the Executive Board, a nominee must be ordained 2 years and must have ministered successfully for a minimum of 6 years. They must have supported the Church of God Mountain Assembly program during that time. There is a tenure of office limitation on the Executive Board, so that each member of the General Overseer and the Assistant General Overseer are limited to 3 consecutive terms. They can serve a total of 6 years in that office. They can serve a maximum total of 12 consecutive years on the Executive Board. The General Secretary and Treasurer and his assistant are limited to 6 terms consecutive and 12 consecutive years in their respective office. General officials, in addition to their salaries that are included in each individual resolution about them, each of the general officials, the full-time officials, are given 2 weeks of paid vacation, and they're also given severance pay at the conclusion of their service. That severance pay includes 1 week per year that they served in office. And so when a man has served his 6 years or his 12 years or whatever the case is, then he gets paid one week's salary for each year that he served. Let's talk about the officials themselves and the general overseer and his assistant. The duties of the general overseer are to look after the general interest of all the churches. They're to keep a record of all the ministers. They're to moderate the General Assembly. And then they're to make an annual report to the General Council of the work that's done during that year. The general overseer is required to be full-time. He's full-time working for the Church of God Mountain Assembly. He's not allowed to pastor a church. In addition to his salary, he's also given a housing allowance of $500 a month and is to provide his own housing in the vicinity of Jellicoe. The word vicinity, when it was added to the bylaws, the word vicinity was defined as within a local telephone call. And we probably will have to redefine that at some point in time when we get to a point when there's almost no such thing as a local telephone call anymore. There's almost no such thing as a local landline. But at that time, and still, that means that he has to live somewhere between Corbin and La Follette, somewhere in that general area where there was a local telephone to call to headquarters. The general overseer and his assistant are both paid their travel expense and also their health insurance from the by the General Assembly. The assistant overseer's duties are to oversee world missions, as outlined in Article 5, and we get to later on. He's also to conduct missions rallies in each district and to aid district overseers in building new churches. He does that by supplying a variety of blueprints and church plans, seeking new areas to promote or to build churches. He is to promote the total assembly program, financially, spiritually, and materially. And he is to make an annual report to the General Council for his work done for the Assembly during that year. And then also, from time to time, the Assistant General Overseer will have special assignments given to him by the General Overseer. The Assistant Overseer, again, like the General, is required to do the job full-time. He's not allowed to pastor a church. In addition to his salary and housing allowance, his health insurance is paid for by the Assembly. His travel expense is paid by the missions department. And all monies that he receives from his preaching engagements, all monies that are not designated as a love gift, go directly to the mission department. And so when the mission director, when the assistant general overseer comes to preach in our local churches, any offering that was taken up to give to him goes directly to missions, unless it's specified as a love gift for the assistant overseer. I talked a little bit about succession of office, back before. If something happens to the general overseer or the assistant overseer, death or resignation or some other circumstances vacate the office, the board of elders is empowered to appoint someone or someones to fill those roles until the next General Assembly. Let's talk about the General Secretary and Treasurer. The duties of the General Secretary and Treasurer include keeping an accurate account of all funds coming into the General Office, to carry in his office a supply of religious literature, such as songbooks, Bibles, textbooks, tithes, envelopes, etc. Tithe envelopes, sorry. He is to maintain office hours from 9 a.m. till noon and 1 to 4, 5 days a week. He shall publish a yearly church calendar containing all the activities of the church for that year. He is required to train his replacement for 2 years when he goes out of office. He is to close his books on July the 10th of each year and send a statement to each minister and church of the monies that they have sent that year. He's to furnish receipts to the local churches for all finance sent to him. He's to reimburse the travel expenses upon completion of an itemized expense form. He is required to do the job full-time. It's a full-time position, and not allowed to pastor a church. In addition to his weekly salary, there is a parsonage provided for him, as well as his travel expense and health insurance paid by the assembly. The assistant general secretary and treasurer is the editor of our monthly periodical, the Gospel Herald. He works for the distribution and promotion of the publication by securing subscriptions. He's required to be at all finance committee meetings on the calendar. He is given a monthly salary, and half of his health insurance is paid for by the General Assembly. He's not a full-time position, so he is allowed to pastor church. His travel expense for the assembly is reimbursed from the general fund. Succession of office rule for the General Secretary and Treasurer and his assistant. If there is a vacancy in either of those positions or both, then the General Overseer is empowered to appoint someone subject to the approval of the Finance Committee to complete the job until the next General Council meeting. The Public Relations Director. His duties are to seek to promote the Assembly and its local churches through all means possible. He is required to maintain a file of photographs of the churches and ministers and other information of each church minister, and will furnish that information upon request. He is to receive the annual reports of the general officials by July the 10th, and then prepare them for the delegates for the General Council meeting. He serves on a non-paying basis, but is allowed his actual expenses to be reimbursed from the Tithe of Tithes fund. The Christian Education Director. His duties are to oversee the National Christian Education Word as outlined in Article 6 that we'll get to develop and promote Sunday school programs and literature for the local churches, to teach churches how to have an effective bus ministry, to hold one Sunday school convention each year with classes on the various methods and ways of teaching and building Sunday schools. He serves on a non-paying basis, but is paid his actual expenses from the Christian Education Treasury. The Men's Director, his job is to oversee the national men's ministries called Men of Integrity, to develop and promote men's ministries, programs, and literature for the local churches, to teach men in local churches how to respect and honor their pastors. He serves on a non-paying basis, and his actual expenses of men's ministry should be reimbursed from the meetings that he holds and or from the districts wherein the meetings are held. The National Youth Ministries Director. His job is to stimulate interest among our youth. He, along with the Executive Board, has the authority to arrange for and promote youth conventions as outlined by the General Council. He promotes the development and use of our campgrounds. He's responsible for special assignments given to him by the General Overseer, and he drafts programs for our national youth work, the Youth Warriors for Christ, as outlined in Article 7 that we will get to. Set to expire in 2018, the National Youth Director is given a budget of nearly $50,000, out of which $22,000 is designated as his salary. The remainder is used for maintenance and upkeep of the campground under the Camp Board of Trustees. There is a house available for him if he chooses to use it. Again, this is one of the temporary provisions that will expire in 2018. And all offerings that the National Youth Director receives when he's preaching in different places, they go directly to the National Youth Treasury unless it's designated as a love offering. The Assistant National Youth Director is paid $95 a day for his participation at all national youth functions, and so that it's not 365 days a year. Don't anybody misunderstand that. It's $95 a day in which there's an event taking place on the youth calendar. And the succession of office on the National Youth Ministries department are such that if there's a vacancy in the National Youth Director or his assistant or both, then the General Overseer is empowered to appoint someone to serve in that capacity, subject to the approval of the camp board, until the next General Council meeting. These are the general officials of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. Let's talk Article 3 is the judicial branch, the Board of 12 Elders, and the 12 elders are the judicial body of the assembly. They have the final decision in any matter that they're called upon to decide. Only the 12 elders can vote in an elders meeting. In order to be qualified to be an elder, to be elected to the position of elder, a minister must be 40 years old, or else they'd be a board of youngers. They have to be 40 years old. They have to have been a member of the Church of God Mountain Assembly for 20 consecutive years, and they have to be an ordained minister for 10 years. The tenure of office for the Board of Elders is such that the elders are elected to an 8-year term. Every year, every 2 years, 3 elders are elected. The 3 that have been on there when their term expires, they're elected to an 8-year term. If vacancy necessitates, then an election is held by the General Council to replace an elder through death or resignation or various circumstances. If an elder is replaced, then the one who takes his place on the elder board serves for the rest of that term, and he is allowed, he's permitted to run again for his own term. And so it won't count against him for that tenure of office. And so if a man's elected, whether it be for the remaining 6 years or the remaining 1 year, then he could run again for an 8-year term. There's a quorum on the elder board meeting. And the quorum that's set by our bylaws is a quorum of 12, or as near that number as possible. And so, in other words, every elders meeting must have 12 elders there. If one of the elders is not present, then the elder board will choose a replacement from the members from any minister who is there who is qualified, to take place on the elder board, to make sure that that quorum is filled, so that you've got 12 elders, or as near that number as possible. And so it is permissible, if nobody's there that's qualified to replace them, then the business can be transacted. Let's talk about committees. In Congress, committees are where most of the work gets done. So let's talk about the various committees the Church of God Mountain Assembly has. The first one is the Finance Committee. We have a committee of 3 on finance, elected every 2 years. Their duties are to audit the books of the General Secretary and Treasurer every 3 months. They are to authorize all expenditures. They are to devise means to increase the income of the assembly. They approve assembly honorariums, and they also review the salaries annually and make a recommendation to the General Council on any raises. Any money that is borrowed by the Church of God Mountain Assembly or any of its departments requires the signature of the General Overseer, the Treasurer, the trustees, the Finance Committee, and then the loan documents are signed by the chairman of the Finance Committee, the chairman of the Trustee Board, and the director that's borrowing that. But an affidavit has to be signed at headquarters by all of those individuals before any money can be borrowed by the assembly or any of its departments. There's a monthly payment plan that's required by our bylaws on all indebtedness. And so We're paying monthly on anything that we're in debt for. And at the end of the fiscal year, if there's a surplus of funds, then a lump sum can be paid as determined by the Finance Committee, that they would pay that to cut down on the Assembly's indebtedness. Looking forward to this year's Assembly and receiving the report that we have no outstanding indebtedness. Amen. With the General Trustee Board is a 5-member board elected every 2 years. Their duty is to look after the property of the Church of God Mountain Assembly Incorporated. They keep in touch with trustees of each local church. If a controversy arises or trouble arises in a local church concerning property that is deeded to the Church of God Mountain Assembly Incorporated, then the assemblies of the assembly trustees, under the direction of the general overseer, are permitted to take charge of such property and rectify the solution. The authority of any general trustee is automatically forfeited when they leave the Church of God Mountain Assembly. We have a committee of 5 on benevolent funds and insurance. We talked a little bit about the special procedure that's used in order to maintain consistency in operation. The 5 members of the board, 3 of them have to be retained each election term. And so they're all elected to a 2-year term, but 3 of them must remain on the board. And so there's an election held at first between the 5 members of the board, and the 3 that get the most votes are retained on the board, and then the floor is open for nominations to elect the remaining 2 at large from the general council. And there's no requirement necessitating that the other 2 can't be reelected. Their job is to establish policies and procedures of the benevolent and burial funds, investments, loans, benefit payments, fixed rates of interest. They review and revise insurance plans and options and proposals to the benefit of our ministers. We have a 3-member camp board. And the National Youth Director is the chairman of that board, and then there's 3 members included besides him. The job of the camp board is to advise and correlate camp, building, and activity, to meet twice a year at the campgrounds and go over the needs of the camp. They make recommendations to the General Trustees and Finance Committee concerning property. They annually review the salary of the Assistant National Youth Director, make recommendations concerning his pay, and their travel expense is reimbursed by the National Youth Ministries Department. We have a 5-member resolution committee that's elected every 2 years, and their job is to receive proposed amendments or adoptions and review them existing standard resolutions or standard bylaws. Or doctrinal statements or teachings. They are to discuss any needed changes with the submitter. The idea is they should really only present a resolution that has the best chance of passing. The chairman, elected by the rest of the committee, is to prepare each delegate a copy of the resolutions prior to the General Council meeting. And then at the General Council meeting, the chairman of the Resolution Committee presents each of the resolutions by form of a motion to adopt the proposed change, and then the committee is also responsible, along with the General Secretary and Treasurer, for the placement of any newly adopted or newly passed resolutions, where to put them in the current constitutional declaration and bylaws. And the last committee is the program committee, committee of 3. This is 3 licensed or ordained ministers. They're elected for 1 year, and their job is to prepare the program for the General Assembly not less than 3 months prior to the General Assembly. So they'll choose the speakers and the devotional leaders and prayer leaders and the theme for the General Assembly. I said the last one. We also have a missions board, and the missions board is composed of the district overseers, the assistant general overseers, the chairman, and we'll talk about the mission department in just a minute. So those are the committees. Let's talk about the departments. These are the areas of national ministry and service. Article 5 deals with the missions department. The missions department includes a section on finance. Every church, the fourth Sunday of the month, is required to take up an offering for missions, as well as $12 each year from the minister. So each licensed and ordained minister is required to send $1 a month to the mission program. Any applications for money from the churches or through a mission project should be made through a district overseer, and that money is to be split up between 2/3 of the money being provided by the district, and the home mission department would provide the rest. Not more than half the mission money received for home missions is designated for work in that district, and so there's some guidelines for finance in the mission program. The Thursday night service of the General Assembly is designated as Missions Night, and it's under the direction of the mission director. Let's talk about the Christian Education Department. Each local church shall send to headquarters an offering each month for the National Christian Education Department. There's also something missing from our bylaws, and I'm not sure how it's missing. I'm hoping to ask the question about it at the elders meeting in January. There's also in our bylaws, we have a partnership that exists between us and the Pentecostal Children's Home in Barberville, where $3,000 of excess Christian Education Department funds would be reserved, set aside as the annual support for our obligation with our association with them. There's been a moratorium on that for some time, and I don't know if that's the reason that it was deleted from the bylaws, but it's not been in the bylaws for the last several years, and I know the delegation never voted to take it out of the bylaws, so I hope to find out more about that in January. Hope to find out some answer about it. But that's done under the Christian Education Department. Article 7 deals with the National Youth Ministries and Camp Development Department. Again, just like with the other two departments, each local church is required to send an offering each month to the National Youth Ministries Department, and in addition to $1 a month from each licensed and ordained minister. All money that is raised by the youth department goes directly to the youth treasury, including concessions from concession stands at our youth camps and other meetings. The National Youth Department sponsors 2 national rallies each year, one in the north and one in the south. In addition, they're required to conduct at least 2 weeks of youth camp. We've been conducting 3 for longer than this resolution has required to, but at least 2 weeks of camp are required, junior and senior youth. And also the National Youth Department sponsors all other camps and retreats. The National Youth Campgrounds, all the work done there is under the jurisdiction of the General Trustees. The National Youth Director is responsible for the campground's use and user fees under the guidelines of the General Council. So the rental amounts and this and that and the other are set by guidelines by the General Council. The National Youth Treasury is responsible for maintenance, utilities, taxes, and insurance on the campgrounds, except for the utilities and business phone calls, maintenance, taxes, and insurance on the parsonage, which are paid out of the general treasury as a general official. Article 8 is on the National Ladies Ministries Department. The National Ladies Ministries has 3 officers, a president, a vice president, and a secretary and treasurer. Primary purpose of the National Ladies Ministries is to create fellowship among the local ladies ministries, provide information, inspiration, and guidance whereby the local chapters may be assisted in their endeavors for God and His church. The ladies officers are elected for 2 years by the ladies in a National Ladies Ministries Council meeting during the General Assembly. Each of the officers serves for 2 years. They are limited to 3 consecutive terms. They're allowed to serve 6 years in each of those offices, and under no circumstances can any lady serve more than 12 consecutive years as a National Ladies Ministries officer. The National Ladies President shall give general leadership, serve toward the objectives of the department, and also serve as chairperson in all the National Ladies meetings. The National Ladies President must be 30 years old, must be a member in good standing of the Church of God Mountain Assembly for at least 5 years, and must have the recommendation of her pastor. The Vice President, likewise, must be at least 25 years old, must be a member for at least 5 years, and must be in good standing, or must be recommended by her pastor. The National Ladies Secretary and Treasurer, of course, her job is to maintain records of the National Ladies Ministries and keep appropriate records of money received and expended. She must be at least 25, must be a member of the Church of God Mountain Assembly at least 5 years, and must be recommended by her pastor. Each of the ladies officers shall furnish an annual written report to the General Council. Each Ladies Ministries, I've already read that, about the tenure of office. The program of the Ladies Department is such that the Ladies President shall plan and conduct at least 2 National Ladies Days a year, one scheduled in the north and one scheduled in the south. And the ladies officers, when traveling for Ladies Ministries business, they draw their travel expense from the ladies' treasury. Article 9 relates to the chaplain's ministry. The mission of the chaplain's ministry is to fulfill the rights of all people for the free exercise of religion by the communication of the gospel, the engagement in the worship of God, and the development for ministries of compassion. Chaplain's ministry operates under the auspices of the mission department and for direction and for the financing of the ministry. Applications for chaplaincy must be received with unquestionable recommendations from his local church, his pastor, and his district overseer. Must present 2 business references. He must have an endorsement renewed every 7 years. Chaplains who leave our denomination under any circumstances immediately tender their qualifications and their licensing. The endorsement certifies the applicant is a fully ordained minister, actively engaged in or retired from an approved ministerial vocation, and recommended as being spiritually, morally, intellectually, and emotionally qualified to represent the Church of God Mountain Assembly as a chaplain. And so formal educational requirements are specified by the agency or institution where they will serve. That's Article 9. Article 10 is under headquarters office personnel. We have one job there at headquarters in addition to the general officials, and that's that of the administrative assistant. The administrative assistant is hired by the executive board with hours consistent of those of the General Secretary and Treasurer, wages paid from the general fund, approved by the Finance Committee, receiving vacation pay and comp time as approved by the Executive Board. And basically the job of the Administrative Assistant is to assist the General Secretary and Treasurer and the Executive Board in the day-to-day operations in the headquarters. Let's talk about districts. And we'll talk about the way that they are the way that they're laid out. We have district overseers elected for a term of 2 years annually by the ministers in that district, by secret ballot vote. And so the election is generally held the last meeting before the annual assembly. 4 or more ministers must be present in order to have the election, and the election is subject to the approval of the executive board. In districts where there are less than 4 churches, the overseer is appointed by the executive board. The duties of the district overseer are to look after the interest of the local churches, keep a record of all work in their district, give a detailed report each month to the general overseer. They should be allowed to pastor one church, endeavor to settle all matters of dispute that arise in that district, seek to build new churches and assign pastors to them, conduct district fellowship meetings, which are to be held as often as they deem necessary or convenient, conduct quarterly meetings with the churches in their district to consist of explaining the government procedure, assembly program, and the administration of that program. They shall see that each church and pastor is complying with the assembly program. They must conduct or authorize business meetings in churches which are pastored by a licensed minister. That's the duty of the district overseer. District youth directors are appointed by the national youth director. District youth directors conduct district youth rallies in their district. The district ladies coordinator is appointed by the National Ladies Ministries director. She must be a member in good standing in her local church and recommended by her pastor. The district ladies coordinators shall conduct ladies meetings in their district and work to promote the national ladies ministries in that district. The district, let's talk about district finance. District overseer and churches under his care are to work out a plan to cover his expenses. In addition to that, 1% of all the tithes that are sent from the churches in that district are returned to the district for the support of the district and to meet the expenses in the district. Offerings that are taken up in district youth rallies are to be divided, with half going to the National Youth Department and half remaining within the district treasury. 10% of the dues received in the National Ladies Treasury from the local churches should be given back to the Ladies District Coordinator for the district expenses, and so that they can continue to operate ladies ministry on a local level. Let's talk about guidelines for ministers, for our credentialed ministers. Article 12 is about ministers, and specifically about, in particular, ministers' credentials. We have bishops, licensed ministers, and Christian workers' credentials only. All certificates are renewed annually, except the ordination certificates. Fellowship cards are issued to the ordained and licensed ministers, and all ministers' credentials must bear the standard seal of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. Licensed ministers are licensed annually by the local church. They have the right to preach and defend the gospel, baptize believers, to administer the Lord's Supper and the washing of saints' feet, and they may pastor a church under the supervision of the district overseer. All applicants, their qualifications to be a licensed minister in the Church of God Mountain Assembly, each applicant must have the baptism of the Holy Ghost. They must have conducted 2 or more successful revivals, or have been actively engaged in either evangelistic or pastoral work, and they must be a member of the Church of God Mountain Assembly for at least 1 year before being recommended for minister's license. There is an application for the process that the applicant is first recommended by his local church and pastor, application approved by the district overseer, and then that application submitted to headquarters with his annual financial contribution, and then when approved by the general overseer, then his certificate is signed and returned to him. Each minister is required to report quarterly to his district overseer. A minister moving from another district should report to his new district overseer as soon as possible. Licensed ministers who have been licensed for 2 years and are presently engaged in the ministry may be ordained if found eligible. And all licensed ministers are to pay a $20 renewal fee to renew their credentials annually. Half of this amount goes to headquarters, and the other half is returned to the district ministers, to the district treasury. Ordination of ministers, all ordination of bishops and deacons is in accordance with the Bible. In ordaining bishops, the church where the applicant belongs shall first set him apart for examination. If the church approves him for ordination as a bishop, then he goes before the Board of Elders for questioning. And then if approved by the Board of Elders, he would return back to his local church and be ordained in his local church in the presence of his pastor and local church. Any minister applying for ordination shall have completed a study of the Old and New Testament, survey through a course approved by the Elder Board, and he must also complete the Church of God Mountain Assembly History and Doctrine course. No divorced and remarried individual whose former companion is now living should be ordained to the office of bishop. These are the guidelines that are established for ordination of a bishop. Women ministers may be licensed, but they're not allowed to baptize, to pastor a church, or to administer the Lord's Supper, and we do not ordain women. When a minister comes into our organization from another organization where he has had credentials, if he's recommended by his pastor and his district overseer, he can be issued a temporary minister's license, and then after completing the course on Church of God Mountain Assembly History and Doctrine, he may appear before the Board of Elders for final examination, and if approved by the elders, then he will be his credentials will be matched from the group that he came in from. Financial obligations for ministers, it's mandatory that licensed and ordained ministers and deacons pay their tithes. When failing to do so, and after proper admonishing by the district and general overseer, their license and authority should be revoked. Ministers pay their tithes into their local church. If they're pastoring the church, then their tithes are sent to headquarters or forwarded on to headquarters. The licensed general officials pay their tithes directly to headquarters. And a complete record of all ministers' tithes paid shall appear in the minutes each year. So the complete record of all ministers' tithes paid to headquarters and paid to the local church are to be printed in the minute book. Let's talk about offending ministers. In the case of an offending minister, a board consisting of the district overseer and 2 ordained ministers who have no connection with the case when available should give due notice to the time and place where the charges will be considered. Ministers shall have the right to attend and be heard at that time, and the board shall determine, that board of the district overseer and 2 ordained ministers shall determine that the said conduct of the said minister warrants such action. If they determine, then they shall recommend to the General Executive Board that the minister's credentials be revoked. If he's found not guilty by the accused, from the accusers, the accusations against him, then the charges, of course, are dismissed. If the defendant minister is not satisfied with the decision of the district board, then he may appeal to the general overseer within 10 days, and the general overseer will appoint a board to rehear the case. If he's not satisfied with that decision, if that's unsuccessful, then he may appear before the board of 12 elders. And so in no case can a minister be excluded from the Church of God Mountain Assembly without being heard by the board of 12 unless he does it on his own free will. Any minister who's been excluded from the assembly, wishes to come back, must first be reconciled to the local church where he was excluded, and then go before the Board of Elders for reconciliation. Any minister found guilty of fornication or adultery shall be placed under these guidelines for restoration. No public ministry for 2 years. During said time, true repentance must be observed. If he's pastoring a church, he should be removed. The minister will be relocated to another church, mutually agreed upon, and it will be the responsibility of the minister to work with the pastor to bring about a threefold restoration during the 3 years in the areas of the guilty minister, of family and marriage relation, as public function as a clergyman. The minister must publicly confess his sin before the congregation, repent, and request forgiveness. And then during the 3rd year, the minister can begin to preach and teach, but not pastor a church. After fulfilling the 3 years of that program, then the minister's credentials may be restored at that time. I talked at great length about the minister's benevolent plan in an earlier session, and so I'm not going to try to cover any of that tonight in the next section, but it's there under section H of Article 12. Let's talk about local churches. Article 13 deals with polity in the local church and begins with membership in the local church. Each local church is only organized after there are 15 members. Any church that has been organized but then falls to less than 15 active and supporting members falls under the jurisdiction of the general of the district overseer. The general overseer and the executive board, if necessary, will take charge of the church, the director of the church, and the general trustees will assume control of the property. When a member chooses to, when it's necessary for a member to move his membership from one church to another, he presents himself to the church in which he wishes to move his membership, and the clerk of that church writes to the clerk of the other church for a letter of transfer, and that letter then is sent by the clerk from that local church and through an official transfer in the business meeting. Any church, any member that's been excluded from any of our churches has to first be reconciled to that church before they can join another church within our organization. So if you've been excluded from one church, you have to be reconciled to that church in order to legally join another one of our churches. Let's talk about finance in the local church. Each local church is required to maintain a treasury. Each local church is also required to take an offering on the first Sunday night of June prior to the close of the fiscal year, and send that offering to headquarters by July 10th for the upkeep of the assembly grounds. The members pay their tithes into the local church, and then a tithe of those tithes are sent to headquarters in the tithe of tithes. If an evangelist is conducting a revival in one of our local churches, the tithes of the offering that he receives is deducted from what the church gives him, and those evangelist tithes are sent to headquarters on his behalf. Headquarters has recommended that each local church have a fireproof safe to store the official books of the church. Recommended that each church incorporate as a 501c3 nonprofit organization within their local state. It's recommended that all pastors' salaries are reviewed annually, and that a recommendation of any increase be done by the trustees or a finance committee in the local church, and the local body vote on them for each year. It's recommended that the salary be increased by the current percentage of a cost of living increase, or by the rate set by the Finance Committee for the raise of the general officials. The Assembly recommends that the salary package be provided for the pastor, including but not limited to family, life, and health insurance, housing allowance, travel reimbursement for assembly functions, paid vacation, and anniversary benefits, and scholarship funds to further ministerial studies, retirement plans, pastor's appreciation day, and other things that might be deemed appropriate. Property in the local church. The Assembly, of course, recommends that all properties be deeded to the Church of God Mountain Assembly in Jellicoe, Tennessee. The incorporation of the Assembly deeded to the General Assembly trustees. That there's an adopted deed form for that purpose. Of course, the trustees in the local church have the care of the property in that local church. They're to make recommendations to the body. Any outlay of money, of course, would be required for the church to approve. Officers in the local church, the active members present at the business meeting in the month of June prior to the General Assembly in even-numbered years shall conduct an election for officers other than the election of pastor. Now, the pastor is going to be elected every 4 years, but the other officers of the church, the clerk, the treasurer, and the trustees, shall be nominated by the pastor of the church, and the nominees shall be members of the church, and they will be approved or disapproved by the members of the church through a yes and no vote. All pastors shall be, all churches shall elect pastors who are licensed or ordained by the Church of God Mountain Assembly, or in accordance with our agreement with our sister organizations. And there's some guidelines for different organizations. Elections must be held by secret ballot. All confidence votes taken by the pastor should be secret ballot. Pastor should be elected every 4 years. The pastor should confer with his district overseer before he resigns. If the pastor resigns before his term is up, or for any other reason the position becomes vacant, the district overseer, with the approval of the executive board, shall appoint another to take his place until the election by the usual pastoral procedure to fill the unexpired term of the previous pastor. The powers and duties of the pastor are to take oversight, spiritual oversight of the church, as taught in the New Testament, moderate all business meetings, be responsible for the spiritual program, material welfare of the church, and to carry out the program of the assembly as to the local church financial obligations, and to work in harmony, full harmony, with the district overseer. The assistant pastor, if the church has one, have the same qualifications as the pastor, and be responsible and receive his duties from the pastor. The secretary or clerk shall perform the usual duties of the clerk or secretary of a religious organization, keep accurate account of all business meetings, and to keep track of all of the church's records, the books and communications, and to keep a record of all the members of the church, and to deliver those books to any general official of the assembly or district overseer when asked to do so. The treasurer of the church shall keep true and accurate account of the church's financial income, to keep a correct record of all funds paid out, to be the custodian of the church funds and books of accounts, to disperse the church's money only by general or special authorization of the church, except those bills that are, routine, regularly paid bills, maintenance and electricity and what have you, utilities, and to render at business meetings a complete record of the church's financial condition. The local church trustees The local church shall have at least 3 trustees, and they shall hold all property in their trust, but can't buy or sell or dispose of any property unless given authority of the church to do so. They're to see that the property is kept in repair. Their names and addresses are to be included on the statistical report to the General Assembly. And then in each local church, all the departments, the Sunday school, youth ministry, ladies ministry, pastoral care, all these are under control of the church, and their activities must be approved by the church. The auxiliary officers of the church should be elected in whatever manner the church chooses. Each local church shall maintain a Sunday school. The local youth president or leader should arrange for weekly programs to work in harmony with the pastor. Same thing with the local ladies auxiliary, working under the jurisdiction of the pastor to promote the general welfare of the church and promote fellowship among the sisters of the church. And each of the local ladies ministries are encouraged to donate $12 a year for the national ladies ministries for dues. Let me ask, are there any questions?